So this is might be short, might be long, depends on how difficult I find fixing it. A video about the Twitch version 5 API updates and how they affect small JavaScript apps. The code that I'm using shows the box art for the game you're playing on your stream. You can add it in with OBS or XSplit, and I'm going to update that to version 5, see what problems has come up, and debug them, and just have a poke around the API really and see what needs to be done. Bear in mind, I was live streaming this, so it might be a bit random direction, but we'll get there in the end. Most importantly, as I'm coding, I have a cup of tea. And I also have a biscuit, if that's required at some point. So let's get started, shall we? So let me show you my application. And actually, I'm just going to go off screen a second. Okay, so here's the current version of my box art that's available, and it's here. And let's just open this in Chrome and see what it does. Let me just bring the window over here for you so you can see what's going on. I think this is wrong, so let's have a quick look at the debugger. So I use Control-Shift-I, you can use F12 or whatever. I'm in the wrong thing. Okay. Let's close this one over here so I'm not confused. So what this is telling me is I've made a bad request to the API, and actually I do know what has caused this problem. Let me just show you my code. And this is a very old piece of code that I wrote quite a while ago, and over the last 6 months, I think, Twitch introduced a thing where they needed to have the client ID supplied as part of any call to the API. This was for the client IDs provided when you set up an application in Twitch, and it's used for rate control and things like that. It's nothing too complicated. You didn't used to have to add it, but you do have to add it to every single API call now. So if we just look at my code, I actually commented out because I have already fixed this. This is my code. It makes a call to the Kraken API and calls for channels, data type JSON, and it makes a callback when there's access to this function here. If I undo this change here and go back to it, and we'll run it again. So if I save all of this, save all, and go back to, I've got one of these open somewhere. This one. There we go. Okay. If I refresh this, now we can see we've got the creative badge now, right? And most importantly, no errors in the browser. So that was one thing I needed to fix. The other thing I needed to fix, or I need to look at, and that's what the stream's about, is recently Twitch announced they were going to release version 5 of Kraken. It comes with quite, as far as I'm concerned, as a very small developer, quite a lot of provisos with a relatively tight deadline. Let me just tell you what the deal is. So you need to migrate your code, and I'm quoting this directly out of the email from Twitch. You need to migrate your code to use v5 on February the 14th, 2017. So what's that? December, January, February, 3 months' time. We'll be removing version 1 and version 2 of the API and transition version 3 into deprecated. And all that means is you won't be able to make version 1 and version 2 calls, and version 3 will no longer be officially supported. In 1 year, so in February 14th, 2018, v3 will be moved from the API set altogether, so you won't be able to make a call to the v3 API. So it actually makes a lot of sense now to work out what we need to do to get ourselves working with v5 from the very get-go. The key change is the use of user IDs rather than, or IDs generally, rather than names. So my channel's Unshaped Adrian, and when I make a call to Kraken, I can put Unshaped Adrian in, and it gives me things, gives me details about my channel and what have you. So let's have a quick look at that. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tool called Postman, which I found from an online course I did. Postman was a Chrome app, and actually Google have decided they're going to deprecate their Chrome applications, but Postman's quite popular and they've released a desktop version. So I'm just going to quickly show you Postman and show you what it can do. So let's get rid of this, and we don't need that for the time being. Let's bring up Postman. So this is Postman. It's a really useful tool. Well, I think it's useful for making calls to APIs, and I've used it for testing my own things, my own server code, but it's also great for testing things like Twitch and you know, anybody else that's got an API. The key thing, it allows you to add all the headers and all that kind of thing in without having to write JavaScript to do that for you, and managing callbacks and all that kind of thing. It's got a really nice presentation. It's got a really nice way of saving things and setting up the APIs, right? So if we just flick back to my code for my box art, and hopefully that resolution and that font size is okay for you guys to read. Let me just show you right at the top here. We set the channel name, Unshaped Adrian, and we use that throughout the code. So var channel set to Unshaped Adrian, and if you want to use this code yourself, all you do is you edit this name here, put in your own channel name, and save it, and away you go. I won't go through all the code, but let's just scroll down to the first time I call into Twitch, right, and have a look and see what we do. I use Ajax, and actually I'm just going to move this over here a little bit because we don't need all that, and that will make more use of the space. I use Ajax because it's nice and easy to use. You can this is from jQuery. You can do 101 different ways of calling APIs in JavaScript, but this is the one I like. It's nice and clear, and I find it easy to understand. We're going to make a call to this URL here, and as you can see, it's got the api.twitch.tv. Kraken is the name of the API, and then channels. And then what I do is I add the channel name, so then that's going to be / Unshaped Adrian, and I make the call based on that. I should get a return, and I can then manage the data that comes back in my code. Later. If we go back to Postman, we can do exactly the same thing in Postman without writing any code at all. Okay, so I've just copied the URL. So it's api.twitch.tv / kraken. That's KRAKEN. Channels Unshaped Adrian. Okay. As discussed earlier, we need to add a client ID on. So I'm going to use my client ID from my application here. And the way we add headers is you just type a value in here, client, and then type the value in here, and that's all you need to do. Okay, so actually, let's get rid of that. These are all defined as part of the Twitch API, and obviously this is client-ID, and this is the string. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll make that call. It's a get, which is the default request call, and we'll send that. Takes a couple of seconds, and it comes back. And actually, what all of the Twitch APIs do is they return JSON. Now, you're going to get quite used to handling JSON if you use the Twitch API. It's fairly standard. I struggle with it to start, but actually it's not too bad, and it's one of those things you just get used to. And it's basically descriptive, right? So what we see here, and bear in mind I'm calling the version 3 of the API, okay? Still, we're not doing any version 5 stuff. We're just doing version 3 at the moment. It returns all this data here. So whether the channel's mature, the status of the channel, i.e. the title, languages, and other stuff like my display name. This is going to be very important later on, the underscore ID, but also things like name, created, whole loads of stuff in here. And it also gives me this links breakdown, okay? Now, the links breakdown is useful because the Twitch API is supposed to be self-descriptive, which basically means that I can call this top level API just as a for example, and then it gives me other things that I can call off of this level. So, for instance, if I wanted to find my follows, I can grab this, right? Copy this, and let's go back here. We'll add another tab. We'll paste that in, right? And don't forget we've got to add our header. So we'll go back to here. Oh, where are we? Get body. Where's the request? How do I get back to the request? I can never remember. You know, it's here somewhere. I know it is. How do I go back to the request? Better find that out now. Oh, where is it? Oh, there it is. It's right up the top. I've just scrolled down past it. What a plonker. We need this client ID, right? So if we're going to make another call, we need to make this. So we'll just copy this out. We'll go over here. We'll add a header, client dash ID, stick our value in, and then make this call as well. It's going to call into Twitch, and it's actually going to give me a list of all my followers, right? And they're broken down. Some interesting JSON configuration there, okay? The links section here is one of the things that's going to go from the version 5 API. So if I just have a quick check back to the documentation I've been sent from Twitch, it says there are other changes to note with this version, and the first thing to note is the underscore links object is removed from all responses. As a developer, you're responsible for handling the paging offsets when polling the API. Okay, so it's just going to go away, and it's understood. I think the API is already documented elsewhere, so why waste the small amount of bandwidth every time to redocument it for everybody? Okay, so in the documentation it says to make a version 5 call, we need to add another header. It documents the header and it gives you a curl example of how you add the header in. But we can do exactly the same thing in Postman. And as you can see, I've already added it in here. So I'm going to do that. And the key here is accept, and the value is application/vnd.twitchtv.v5 and JSON. Okay. Now, based on what we're told in the documentation, in the piece of documentation we sent, this will probably fail. The implication, although not explicitly called out, is that every time we try to use the name, it will fail, and that we need to use an ID here. Okay, so let's make this call anyway and see what happens. So let's send that, and as you can see, we can get in a 404. Okay, and what we can tell from this is the only thing we've changed here is the API version, right? If we uncheck the version 5 and go to the default version, which is, I think, 3, it might be 2, but I think it's 3, it works. As soon as we add the version 5 in, we send it again, it fails, okay, with an error. So that tells us something useful, that we know that our API call that we're currently making is going to fail, okay? What we need to do then is find out the ID of the channel. Now, We can find that out really easily, right? Using Postman. If we remove the accept version, so we're back to version 3, send that, we can see the ID down here. It's actually this number here. Okay, so we'll copy that and we'll go to here. What we'll do is we'll actually just take this piece off, put the ID there, and then we need the accept as well. So we need to add accept here. Put that in, and instead, so only difference between this tab here is that I've got unshaped Adrian on the end. This tab here has got my ID on the end, right? This one fails, 404. This one works and returns me the data about my channel. Notice it's a shorter amount of data and the underscore links is missing. Okay, so we've proved a point to ourselves, right? That if we want to use V5 in any way, shape, or form, we have to get rid of our channel name. We have to go and find the ID from somewhere. Now, the email from Twitch and the blog post from Twitch suggests, which seems rather daft to me, that you use a V3 API to retrieve the username. And I looked at it and thought, well, okay, but V3 is going away completely in a year. Why would I want to bake an API into my code that's only going to last for a year and then I'll have to redo it again? I think the implication is that most people, most big developers, most big integrators with Twitch API will already have the ID in their data. So, for instance, when you set up, what's a good example? Streamlabs. You log on with your Twitch account. They'll already have your ID because it's part of the authorization. So all they need to do is switch their code and go, oh, instead of using the username, use the ID. Done. For simpler code, it's more problematic, right? I don't want to have my users of my little tool have to load up Postman to find out their ID, right? I want to find out for them. And I don't want them to have to make this change up the top here and change this into a horrible number that they don't understand. I want to be able to leave this as their channel name so they can easily understand what they're doing and then hide that from them in the code. But like I say, calling a V3 API seems a bit pointless. So what I did was I had a look around on the forum post where the announcement had been made about the V5 API, and I found a couple of ideas in there on what we could do to get the user ID from the username. So have the username, send a request to Twitch, get the user ID, and then carry on from there, right? Just bear with me 1 second because it's quite warm in my study and I need to take off my hoodie. So bear with me 1 second. I'll be back in a minute. So we're going to have a quick look into that now. So the suggestion was to, let me just see if I can find the thread. Bear with me a second. Open that in a new tab. Here we go. And where are we? Oh, we can use search channels, right? Okay. So let's use this. So we need to make a different API to try to resolve the username, and we'll test it in Postman first. But I need to get some code out. Hang on. Here we go. So Twitch has this set of APIs for searching for things, and they're all called in the same way. And I actually use that in my box art code. You can see that here. And I'm gonna grab this because it'll give me a useful starting point, right? Let's just copy that and let's stick that into Postman in a new tab. And what we need to do is we need to change some of this, right? So a couple of new things about the API as well, which I'll go through for the searching thing. Okay, so we need to have in here, we need to have Unshaped Adrian, because that's my channel name. That's the name I'm trying to resolve to an ID. This needs to be search channels, and that should do things, right? Now let's have a look. Let's we need to go to our headers, and we need to copy our headers out of here, because otherwise it won't work at all, and we won't be using v5. So client-id and the accept we need as well. There we go. Now let's see if this will work. Okay, so that's not come out very well, and the reason for that is, and I did do a bit of investigation into this yesterday, is that one of the other changes in the API, because there are only a few, is, and this is in there are other changes to note with this version. One is about the links, and another is replaced queue and type parameters on the search endpoint. The queue parameter is now called query, and the type parameter is always set to suggest. So I need to change this to query, I believe. Oh, right. Let's see if that works. And there we go. Okay, so we've got a working call this time. So that's a subtle change, I would say. Lots of people are used to using Q equals for queries, and they've actually forced you to change that to query rather than just Q. And in theory, I can remove type, right? Because it says by default type is set to suggest, or is always set to suggest. So let's just try that as well. Okay, so that gives me that, right? So what you can see from this is we get a piece of JSON back, which we can use to map the name of the channel to its ID, right? And then we can use the ID in all our other v5 calls to make the right calls rather than having them fail in v5, which they will if you try to use the channel name. So that's some testing with Postman. Really useful tool, which I absolutely love, because it saves me having to write code all the time and muck about debugging and whatnot. Whereas with this, you can just plonk some URLs in, stick some headers in, jobs are good. And we also now have a rough idea about how we can work out our code to do away with the v3 calls and use v5, and how we're going to work out what the ID is for the channel name, right? So let's quickly go to the code. Let me quickly show you again what the code does. Let me find my window. So all the code does is it pops this up in your browser. It's obviously meant as a browser source for OBS or XSplit, and it goes to Twitch, works out what game you've got set up in your profile, and then it downloads the box art for you and displays it. It's really, really straightforward. The code is also relatively straightforward. There's a couple of things of note. One is that obviously we've got the username or the channel name configured at the top, which people need to change so it picks up their art rather than my art. But apart from that, it's really pretty straightforward. I make a few calls. One to get the current game from the channel, and the current game is actually specified in the channel's description. So if we go back to our API call here to the ID, we can see that the game is here. In my case, that's creative at the moment, but it's often some other game. And then we do another callback to get another function to go and get the URL for the image, which we then populate into the HTML. And that's a search, interestingly enough, for games, and goes. Okay, so we can initially see that I'm currently going to be using the current version of the API. So I want to change these two API calls so that they're going to work with v5. So I'm going to go through and do that first, bring this up to v5, note that it fails because we totally expect it to fail, and then fix the user ID and get that added in. Okay, so to use v5, we need to add the accept header. So let's just bang that in here. So we need accept here, colon, and then I'll have to copy and paste that from somewhere. Accept, here we go. So this is v5. And that needs to go in there. And so we've got two entries in our headers object now. It's nice and clear, easy to understand what's going on there. And let's just grab all of this because we need to put that in our other call, which is down here. So I only do two calls to get this to work. So we need to add that to the headers object here. That's all the same. And then the one thing we do need to do is change this into a query rather than a queue, because the queue equals will fail in the query. I'll leave the type you suggest on there for the time being. It probably doesn't make any difference whether it's there or not. And it just saves making too many changes all at once. So that now should force it to v5, and it should also make my app fail. So let's just save all of this and go back to my sample. And we'll quickly refresh. I've got the debugger up on the right-hand side. We expect to see some errors in there, right? So yeah. So we've got a 404 back from Twitch saying stuff off. I don't know what you're talking about, which is fair enough, and exactly what we'd expect, right? We expect it to fail at that point. Because we've gone to v5, we're still passing unshaped Adrian rather than the ID. So now we've got to work out what we're going to do to replace the username or the channel name with an ID. And you'll be able to start to tell from here, I haven't actually planned this bit out too much. I did poke around with this API yesterday evening, but I'd spent all day at work and I was really tired. And so I got to the stage where I was just typing random characters into my editor. Anyway, let's just quickly go through the code and see what's actually going on in the initial piece, so we can work out where we need to make any changes. Okay, this is everything under here. It's a very short piece of code. All the rest of its functions, which we'll look at in a minute. So we do a couple of checks here to see if the value's set here, and if it isn't, we add the default large box art. So what that means is that as soon as the page renders, we'll populate it with the default box art, which you can find on this CDN up here, just here. So we update the image in the HTML so that you don't end up with a blank, because basically the code goes through and polls every 5 minutes, and you don't really want it to wait blank for 5 minutes. So it puts the default in, and then we basically go straight into getting the current game, right? When this is resolved, and it's asynchronous, so actually it'll carry on straight here. It sets up a timer to make repeated calls then to get current game. Okay, and the polling time in seconds is set to 5 minutes. Okay, so every 5 minutes it goes off, checks your channel, see if you've changed games, and if it does, it updates the box art. So let's go and find get current game, because that's the first thing we call, just to see what that does. Okay, so that's the first call into Twitch there. Okay, so before we hit this, we need to have changed our channel name into something that's actually works with v5, right? And then, okay, so that should work. Okay, so I think I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up a new global here. I'm going to call this resolved channel ID. Set it to false. And actually, no, we don't. I don't know that we need that, to be honest. Let me just have a think about how the code flow is going to work. So if instead of making this call here, we make another call to a different function that goes off and resolves the name, populates, goes to get current game. Yeah, that will work. So I don't think we need that. I don't think we need that. Oh, that's the wrong place for comments. So let's go down here. Let's comment this out. And instead of doing get current game, the first time we load the page, we'll do, what should we do? Get channel ID, I guess. We'll call it ID. And we'll set that up. We don't need to send anything to that. Let's, these are all my, I haven't done this, I haven't organized this code very well actually, but never mind. We shall put this right near the top. So let's grab this, because we're going to make a copy of this, and we're going to stick that in there and call that get channel ID. Right, so let's add that back in. We're going to call this get channel ID. Get channel ID. So we'll make a call into there. We want to change these comments. Let me just delete that. V5 needs a channel ID rather, than a channel name. So we're going to do get channel ID, and we've got pretty much everything we need there. We need to change this, so let's just call a function set channel ID. Yeah, okay. ID. And actually we need to change the API we were going to call, and we've got that in Postman somewhere, I think. Right, let's just go back over to Postman. So that's this query here. Okay, so let's grab this, copy, and we need to replace that here. It's going to need a bit of tidying up. So we don't need that there, and we need to add our channel name, which is the actual proper user thing, onto the end of the query, right? So that's going to do search channels. The query's going to be, do we need to have that in? Yeah, I think we do. So we need to have that in apostrophes, don't we? Double quotes. Let me just take a look at Postman again. So yeah, we need that in double quotes, which is a bit unhelpful, but never mind. Let's just add that on the end. Do we? Do we really? We don't need that in quotes there, do we? I don't think. I think we can do this. Let's just see if that works. Yeah, that works. Okay. So we don't need that. I don't need to overcomplicate my quotes, right? So that's going to add the channel name on. That's fine. And we need a comma after that because that's a member there. Okay. So that's going to do get channel ID. It's going to make the call. It's asynchronous, so we need to set a callback. So we need to set up our callback set channel ID function as well. So let's find one of my callbacks, which is here. Let's actually continue with the theme. So that should be called get channel ID call back. Yep. And we'll grab this here. Copy this and put this under here. And we need to change this copy to this, get channel ID callback. It takes data because data is passed back from the API call. The JSON's passed back. And we need to change this comment. So we need to set the channel ID rather than the name. Okay, so, and we don't need this code. And then what we're going to need to do at the end, once that's finished, is because we're only going to call this the one time, is we need to, now we can get the current game, and then we do get current game, right? And now go off and make the calls to the APIs to get the games rather than that. Okay, so what do we want to do here? We need to extract the ID, the underscore ID field. Let's just go back and have a look at Postman. So this is what we need. We need this value here. So that's called underscore ID. That's in a channels underscore ID. Okay, and I think this is an array. We've got a note as well that this is an array. Okay, that's interesting. Let's just see what it looks like if we try to do something a little bit more generic, which is not a thing that I'm going to ever do. But yeah, okay. So we get loads of nice. Honestly, some people. We get loads of responses, right? So that's an array. So that's value 0, and so on and so forth. Okay. Let's just go back here. And shapes. Let's just run that again. Okay, so we get 1. Okay, so I don't think I need to do anything there because channel name should be unique. So if I'm passing it a string, it should only ever, a particular string, it should only ever return me one value. Although if my channel name was called unshaped and I've requested that, so okay, that's interesting. That's something else I'll have to think about going forward. Because, yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm just thinking aloud that I don't think that's very likely to happen. So let's, for the time being, assume it's going to be the first entry in the array, and we'll go from there. And if I find that's a bit buggy, we'll have to go through them and double check. But so all in fact we want to do there is we want to set channel, which is currently set to our name. We want to set that to data. No. Channels, is it? Channels. 0. Now, do we do dot underscore ID? I can't remember. I can't actually remember the syntax off the top of my head. Oh, that's right, isn't it? Let's just quickly look at the JSON again. So it's channels, entry 0, underscore ID, all lowercase. Underscore ID. Okay, I think we can do that. I think we can do that either way. Let's try it like, oh no, because this is not a, oh, that might work. We'll debug it in a minute and see what happens, right? Okay, so what's going to happen now then? So we're going to set the channel to the ID rather than a name, and then we're going to make a call into get current game. Get current game is going to go off and use this as the channel with version 5. Should all be okay. And in the main part of the code, we're then going to have a timer, which is set for quite a long way in the future anyway, and it's going to call get current game, channel will already be set to the ID rather than the name, so we should all be good to go. Okay, that might be easier said than done. Right, let's save that. Save all. And let's reload our page. So this was where we had the requests with the wrong name. Let's go here. Okay, so that's me. That's my lack of ability to decipher JSON, right? So I was probably right the first time. Get channel ID, set channel ID. I think this need, yeah, that's not right, is it? Although it could be, because maybe it's supposed to be in a string. Is it like that? Let's have a try of that. Okay. Blimey, worked first time. Well, second time. Okay, let's just debug that and make sure that it's doing the right thing. Let's just go to sources, scripts, twitchbox art.jscript. I'm going to move this across here so we've got more JScript and less screen. And we're going to set a breakpoint, get channel ID callback. So we're going to set a breakpoint here, and we'll reload this. Okay, so we come in here, data object is over here somewhere. Let's have a look at data. So that's channels, 0, and there we go, underscore IDs at the top, isn't it? Yep, there we go. Okay, so that should work. So let's just step over this, step over. So now channel is ought to be equal to the number. Bang, there we go. Okay, let me just remove that breakpoint. Play. Okay, and there we go. There's a creative thing. Okay. So that's actually quite good, because basically what that means is for my code now, which is over here. Sorry, I lost it for a minute. You know what it's like. I can take these two. I can take this whole section here. Okay, so let me just comment this out slightly. Need this section for Kraken v5 API calls to convert. Oh God, I can't type names to IDs. Yeah, so that's what that's going to do. And so we just need those two pieces, right? And basically what I can do is end of Kraken v5 requirement. And then what I can do is these two bits of code here, I can reuse in my other tools that I've got. Okay, cool. Okay. So do we need to tidy any of this up while I'm here? I don't think so. Oh, we can get rid of that global. We don't need that. Let's save that all out. Save all. Okay, so in theory, this ought to work, right? So if I... here we go. Let me just try and add it into my scene. Hang on a second. Let's do add browser source. Browser source. Okay. And point that at my path, which is somewhere here. This. Nope. This is one of my GitHub ones. There we go. Git. There we go. Oh no, actually I need the HTML page, don't I? Let's have a look. Okay. copy, add this in here, backslash Twitch box art .html. I can't remember what the size is off the top of my head, but let's, how's that appearing on stream? There we go, it's OBS, right, okay. Let's add that, okay, and there we go, okay. And that should have popped up on stream now with the creative box art, cool. So there we go, that works an absolute treat. Okay, brilliant. That is really cool. And actually, so what I thought was going to be an awful experience with the API, let me just hide that. Now, what I thought was going to be an awful update with the API is actually not hugely complicated. And so now this is using pure v5. It's simple, granted. But this is using pure v5, right? So every time I make an AJAX call, it's forcing v5. Let me just check that. v5 there. And v5 there, right? So I'm completely up to date with the API, which is nice. And that means that's working. So I can push that up to GitHub now and share that around with people now that that's working with v5. And hopefully I won't have to go and fix it again. I'm just going to save all of that out again. Save all. Right, okay, so I'll deal with that later.